Articles of questionable authenticity and shaky logic notwithstanding, Pokemon Sword and Shield have the opportunity to make the Elite Four something so much bigger and better than they've ever been before, which is unsurprising because honestly, based off of past Elite Four members, they're gonna need all the help that they can get. The climax of any player's journey as a Pokemon trainer is undoubtedly their run against the Elite Four. It's a sometimes one-way linear gauntlet of back-to-back fights from the strongest trainers in the region, culminating in a final fight that will almost always have some amazing music. Now that I've just described the Elite Four to you, I don't think there's much more to add, really, especially because good lord, there's nothing more to these characters. In a series with an increasingly strong focus on providing deeper characters on almost all fronts, it's a shame that the Elite Four serve the role of a time capsule indicative of 90s Game Freak design. And the lack of change they've received over the years is proof that these living fossils need a do-over as soon as possible. Sun and Moon broke tradition in almost every sense of the word, but literally created a plot point for Kukui to build a Pokemon League in Alola just so that they could put the Elite Four in the game. Like, they are blatant leftovers from the first generation, and I felt that it was about time for them to get the spotlight that they deserve. With rumours circulating about Sword and Shield scrapping the Elite Four concept entirely, I think there's a lot of merit in looking back on the last 7 generations and really seeing where they messed up, so when November rolls around, we can see if these issues have been fixed to some extent. The Elite Four have exclusively served a purpose in terms of gameplay, but their characters are in a more awkward position. They all feel largely unimportant, and most of the time you rarely even see them before their fights unless they're tied to another character, but I'm not even sure if that's better or worse. Sure, we see characters like Flint before we fight him, but he's still a character we know nothing about despite piggybacking off of Volkner's mini-arc as a gym leader who has lost the fun in Pokemon battles. The games at least attempt to weave the champions into the main story to some degree, so I'm confused why the strongest 4 trainers in the region do literally nothing even during pivotal moments in your adventure like the climax of the evil team's plot. Like, Lenora came all the way from Nacrene fucking City to fight Team Plasma, but Grimsley couldn't walk 2 steps outside the Pokemon League to even say hello. For future reference, I don't think characters included in other games are any better. Caitlyn being a Sinnoh Frontier brain in Platinum doesn't supplement her role as an Elite Four member, it just further shows her lack of character in Black and White because her most defining trait is that she's not a Univern Elite Four member with a deep character, but it's that she's recognizable from another game. I think it's crazy how the gym leaders used to have this issue, but when the time came to give these powerful trainers some relevancy in the main story, they just forgot to do that with the Elite Four, leaving them sitting in a room for all eternity with their only purpose being to serve the gameplay. Granted, I also don't think it's as black and white as giving them those roles, however, and I think this system needs a revamp because Pokemon Sun and Moon exists as literal proof of Game Freak's tremendous dilemma. With how effectively it was brought into the plot through Kukui's motive to break Alola's traditions by creating an Elite Four, you'd be forgiven for expressing disappointment in the result. Instead of 4 literally random characters that were created out of thin air, we got one of those, and 3 characters we had seen time and time again throughout the plot to the point where there was not much new to the Elite Four's roster. This is the insurmountable catch-22 that Game Freak has to deal with. All the games had Elite Fours full of nothing characters that just showed up out of nowhere. And Sun and Moon had 3 characters that didn't bring anything new, alongside one that had 0 characterization. Like, I genuinely challenge you to tell me one thing interesting about Kahili's character except for the fact that she's a golfer, without looking on Bulbapedia. I think the worst part of the Elite Four, aside from just existing solely as a gameplay obstacle, is that they are always secondary to the champion. They're usually given far more development and are always tethered to the Elite Four and are more immediately recognizable as a result. In many previous games, the Elite Four also didn't have a unique battle theme, which further stresses how much this part of the game hinges on the champion battle, especially with how uniquely they've always appeared with their exclusive song dedicated to them and them alone. Type restrictions also don't help things either. The only thing stopping Karen, Sydney, and Grimsley from being the exact same Dark-type battle at the end of the game are the visual designs of the trainers and whichever Dark-type Pokemon happen to be in their respective regional Pokedexes. Something I want to outline is that I don't particularly want the Elite Four concept to disappear, but I do think that it's become noticeably redundant. In all honesty, we wouldn't even need them if more focus was put into Victory Road or the build-up from the 8th gym to the Elite Four, but as evidenced by Alola, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. The bottom line is, the Elite Four only exist to serve a gameplay tradition that hasn't changed all that much in over 20 years. The characters have either been complete randoms with personalities that are non-existent, or ones who have been rehashed for the sake of having an Elite Four in the first place. The champion battle entirely steals the spotlight from trainers that deserve better than to be sidelined for fucking Wallace, and when the Elite Four do have some sort of established thing within the universe, it's almost always tethered to a previous character, rather than feeling individual enough to stand on their own. Let's Go is the only example I can remember that has a champion-like moment with an Elite Four member showing up and doing something before you actually fight them. Encountering Lorelei before Rock Tunnel was a welcome surprise, and it's nice to see a character showcase a strong sense of justice by flexing on Team Rocket, though Bruno, Agatha, and Lance still just kinda sit around in their room all day waiting for a fight to happen. I guess that makes sense contextually, but they weren't afraid to give that outside development to gym leaders in more recent games, you know, characters that basically do the same thing but get a lot more love for some reason. I'm not even suggesting that we do what the manga did and turn them all into psychopaths, but they at least did something. Literally translated, the Elite Four in Japanese reads as the Four Heavenly Kings. That term has some origins in Buddhism, but for the sake of taking some creative liberties, we're going to take that term a bit more literally when revamping the idea of the Elite Four in the Galar region. What if the Elite Four was, well, a monarchy? Being based off of the UK, it would only make sense that the 4 strongest trainers in the region are literal royalty, especially under that Heavenly King's title. Imagine if Leon being that undefeatable champion was something that the Elite Four actually kinda resented, and the story of Sword and Shield challenges the idea of maintaining traditional culture in a similar way to how Sun and Moon did with characters like Hao and Guzma. Or it could go the way of Chairman Rose, grooming Leon through endorsements to be the champion in an attempt to grab power within the region in the most corporate, soulless way possible. I think exploring Leon's struggle as the champion within this power hierarchy could be really compelling and will bring the story full circle around to your rival in Hop, of whom he's obviously related to, and Sonia, who was his childhood friend. Now, that's just some fanfiction I made up in about 10 minutes. Really. But in all seriousness, I think that in stories that often explore tradition, legacy, and generational growth, do the Elite Four have a real place in, especially as they're all extremely strong trainers that don't really exist for any other purpose than to be those strong trainers. I think it would be genius if Game Freak were to deconstruct the idea of an Elite Four member by embracing the fact that they are literally just those brick walls for Pokemon trainers that I described earlier. Picking apart that concept would be so interesting, and I think exploring the legacy of the Elite Four and the status quo of the region is something they've not been afraid to do in the past. And at the end of the day, I just want what's best for characters that have needed a lot of love for a long time, and no, making her a Team Flare member doesn't count. It doesn't make sense. Why was Malva so kind of important but not really important in X and Y? I don't get it. What were they trying to go for? What was the point?